So I just got out of the theater after watching Weapons, and honestly, my brain is still doing cartwheels. I mean, this movie didn't just throw me for a loop, it threw me off the whole carnival ride. No trailers, no spoilers, nothing but a vague idea about kids disappearing going in. And honestly, that was the smartest decision I could have ever made. Weapons isn't your typical horror flick, where you know exactly when the jump scares are coming and who's gonna die first. It's more like being dropped into a puzzle with half the pieces missing and no picture on the box. And instead of panicking, getting frustrated, and then throwing the whole damn puzzle out your second story window, you're just sitting there, glued to the screen and desperate to find the next piece to complete this story. Released August 8th, 2025, Weapons takes place in the small fictional town of Maybrook, Pennsylvania. One night at exactly 2:17 in the morning, 17 kids from a local 3rd grade class get up, walk out of their homes, and vanish into thin air. All except for one. And that is where the true unraveling begins. Going into this movie, I knew next to nothing about it. I knew about the disappearances, I saw the clips of the kids running, it's a horror movie by Cregger, and that's about it. Having said this, going into this film blind is what I strongly recommend that you do as well. As for the story, it doesn't play out in a straight line. Instead, it's broken into numerous chapters, each focusing on a different character. You've got Justine, the teacher of the 3rd grade class that went missing, played by Julia Garner. Archer, the grief-stricken father of one of the students who disappeared, played by Josh Brolin. Paul, a troubled cop, acted by Alden Ehrenreich, and a bunch of others, each giving us pieces of the puzzle until the full picture hits. And when it hits, yeah, it hits hard. To better emphasize why I find Weapons to be so brilliant, I'm going to break this review down into 2 separate parts. First, my spoiler-free thoughts on what I felt about the movie and why I think Cregger's growth as a filmmaker is astounding. Then, I'm going deeper into the story's twists, its hidden meanings, and the theories that have been rattling around back and forth in my brain ever since the credits rolled. So, get ready, because this movie is a ride you absolutely will not want to miss. So, before we jump into the wild, spoiler-filled theories and breakdowns, I've got to talk about my first impressions of Weapons. One of the biggest reasons Cregger is shaking up the horror scene right now is the way that he can both surpass expectations and push the boundaries of what horror can be. Yeah, he still uses classic tropes, of course. Creepy basements, clueless cops, dramatic irony, but instead of feeling cheap or recycled, he twists them in a way that feels refreshing. Instead of me rolling my eyes, I'm sitting there with my jaw on the floor going, wait, what? Weapons is unsettling in the best way possible. We watch all these broken people struggle with the same mystery, and instead of just scaring us, the film also makes us feel genuine sorrow for them. And it does not spoon feed you answers the entire time. In fact, it does the exact opposite, forcing you to pick up on tiny details if you want to truly understand what's happening. You'll spend half the movie asking, how are these people connected? Why are the kids disappearing? And what's really going on? Performance-wise, rock solid, all across the board. Julia Garner absolutely owns her scenes. Josh Brolin nails that broken dad energy. And visually, the cinematography is perfection. Even the child actor playing Alex was great, and I'm usually skeptical about child performances in horror. He handled intense moments flawlessly regardless. Now, let's talk about Cregger's growth as a director. For this review, I actually went back and rewatched Barbarian, and honestly, I might be about to make a controversial claim here. Weapons is the better movie. Don't get me wrong, Barbarian is an incredible breakout film. It's scarier than Weapons, the pacing is heart-racing, and what Cregger pulled off on a $4.5 million budget is insane. But Barbarian does leave a few unanswered questions, and some character decisions are a little hard to buy into when watching the film. Weapons, on the other hand, feels complete. When the credits rolled, I didn't feel like anything was missing. every lingering question can be answered just by rewatching and catching the clues you missed the first time in. And the characters, they feel real. Sure, I had those moments where I was yelling at the screen, telling them to do the smart thing, but I also fully understood why they didn't. That's incredibly rare in a horror film. So, if Barbarian didn't totally click for you, I'd still say give Weapons an honest shot. This might be the one that wins you over. But from here on out, we're going to be heading deep into spoiler territory. So seriously, go watch this movie before you hear what comes next. This is one of those stories that's way more fun to experience without knowing the twists. Please just save my video, come back to it later, and then watch the rest of it. You won't regret your decision. With that being said, I'm going to be going into spoiler territory in 3, 2, 1, disappearing children. Alright, since we're now officially in spoiler territory, let's talk about how Weapons actually plays out through the entirety of the film. Using the chapter format honestly was genius here. Each segment felt like its own story, but they're all orbiting the same terrifying event, the 17 kids walking into the night and disappearing. Watching Justine's chapter first gives you this grounded human perspective. She's not some perfect character. She's messy, flawed, and completely unprepared for what's coming. That made me actually care about her, so when her storyline starts spiraling, it hits. I think that this goes against a huge narrative that's been online, where a lot of people have felt like Justine's character was unjustified, but I think that adds more depth to her character for being a flawed person, for having her own problems. Even with all this being said, she still tries to do the good thing in the end. Then you've got Archer's chapter, which is this slow, heavy gut punch. His grief is so raw that even when you start to suspect he's making bad calls, you get why. Brolin sells the hell out of a man who's drowning in loss and guilt. When he's apologizing to his son in his dream sequence, you can feel the emotion there. Paul's storyline, this is where the tension really spikes. He's got that cop under pressure vibe, but his personal baggage makes him almost as unreliable as the mystery itself. Every scene with him feels like it's about to tip over into disaster, and sometimes it gets that way. Watching him spiral out of control with the pressure of trying to keep his job while handling his adultering behavior, and then trying to keep James quiet about the harmful interaction that he had with Paul during their escapades with the police chase. What I love is how Cregger keeps the audience guessing on every chapter handoff. You think you've got a grip on the mystery, then boom, a detail from another perspective completely changes how you see things. By the time we hit Alex's role in all of this, the tone shifts into a full-blown dread. The film doesn't glamorize him or turn him into some cartoonish villain, it plays tragically, which makes the ending way more unsettling. When we find out that Alex was not a main conspirator, but rather a victim within himself being controlled by his Aunt Gladys. And speaking of the ending, there was no neat little bow. We don't even get the answer spelled out, but that's not a frustrating kind of vague. It's the kind that makes you immediately want to rewatch and piece together every bit of this puzzle. I left the theater both satisfied and unsettled, which for me is the sweet spot for a horror storytelling. The jump scares in this movie were honestly really good. When it comes to the horror aspect of this movie, I think I would disagree with trying to categorize this as a horror film. It's closer to a thriller comedy that has some scary elements to it. I would compare it to levels of scariness like Seven, Longlegs, or Prisoners. Now, I know one of the most popular theories floating around right now is that Weapons is an allegory for a school shooting. And yeah, I get why people are landing there. The imagery is hard to ignore. The AR-15 in Archer's dream, the reoccurring 217 references that tie back to a radio code for an assault with the intent to murder, the lone surviving student, Alex's bullying, the Mae Strong Memorial outside of the school. All of that makes for a convincing case if you're looking at the film strictly through that lens. But here's the thing. I don't really buy that this is what the core story is trying to tell. I'm not saying those elements aren't there, but to me, they feel more like a background texture than the main thesis itself. It might be a subtle secondary message, but I don't think it's the driving force behind the plot. And honestly, the director himself has already said that this isn't the intended meaning. Now, sure, you can argue that once a film is out there, it does belong to the audience, and interpretations are fair game. And I agree with that. But in this case, I think reading the whole thing as purely a school shooting allegory actually limits the story instead of expanding it. The movie is juggling a lot: grief, interconnected trauma, parasitic relationships, and while the tragedy of a school shooting could be one possible metaphor, I think Weapons is operating on a much broader, more universal wavelength than just one specific real-world event. But here's where I think a lot of people are sleeping on the real theme: parasitic relationships and how people feed off of each other, sometimes literally. This one's not even subtle. The movie throws mushroom imagery at you constantly. Justine literally teaches her students about cordyceps, the parasitic fungus that takes over ants. Andrew and his partner watch a cordyceps documentary at home. The ant character, Gladys, collects magic twigs from a tree, and trees of course feed and communicate through roots, another parasitic connection. There's mushroom symbolism around Gladys constantly because she is a parasite, feeding off Alex's parents and the 17 missing kids. This is also why you see that ant cordyceps connection throughout the movie. They were trying to warn us prematurely that Gladys, the ant, is a parasite. The chapter structure even mirrors this idea. Each chapter is incomplete on its own, relying on the others to make sense. Just like parasites need a host to survive, these characters need each other's perspectives to piece together the truth. The theme expands beyond the supernatural. Addiction, adultery, and toxic dependency run through every storyline. Justine enables Paul's drinking and cheating despite his attempts to pull away. Paul stays in a toxic marriage because his wife is the police chief's daughter. His position literally depends on her family. James is a drug addict. Justine is an alcoholic, both trapped by something that eats away at them. Archer is a workaholic who realizes too late he's neglected what matters most, even apologizing to his son in a dream for never telling him he loved him. And then there's Gladys herself. Beyond the mushroom symbolism and possible supernatural trickery, remember when Alex tells his dad, "I don't even know her"? She might not even be his real aunt. She could have magically convinced his parents she's family, the ultimate parasitic move. But thematically, she's more than just a leech. Gladys represents how old, toxic things refuse to die, how we can't change if we refuse to let go. She clings to life, youth, and influence, even as she decays, and in doing so, she drags others down with her. When you look at the movie through that lens, Weapons isn't just about a supernatural mystery. It's about how we attach ourselves to people and habits that drain us, and how breaking free isn't just difficult, sometimes it's impossible. So whether you read Weapons as a commentary on real-life school violence, a story about parasitic relationships and toxic connections, or maybe something entirely different, one thing is for sure. This movie is layered. Cregger isn't playing it safe here. He's swinging for the fences, and the result is the kind of horror film people are going to be debating, dissecting, and rewatching for years. 2025 has already been stacked for horror fans, with 28 years later, Final Destination Bloodlines, and of course, the box office giant Sinners. But Weapons doesn't just hold its own in this lineup. Honestly, it carves out its own spot at the top. Whether you believe that Weapons or Sinners is the greatest horror film to have released in 2025 so far, I honestly think that both of those are solid takes, and that you could make the argument for either of them to be the best horror movie that has released this year. But going back to the main point, this movie is smart, it's unsettling, and it's not afraid to challenge the audience, which is exactly what the genre needs right now. But hey, that's just my take. So if you disagree with anything I've said so far, or you think I have done an amazing job at dissecting this film, I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Please, I read all of them, and if you liked this breakdown, make sure to please consider liking my video, subscribing, and anything in between, because this genuinely helps me out and lets me know what I'm doing good and what I need to improve upon. So until my next video, thank you for watching, and you have a great day.